Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. Just over a week back, the revelations by the now in exile American Edward Snowden about the massive surveillance embarked by the United States had shocked ordinary citizens and even some governments across the world. The debate over that still continues, with the American president strongly defending it. In the meanwhile, the revelations that India has launched its own model of PRISM, the Central Monitoring System or CMS, is bound to kick up a lot of debate in the country. The CMS, which has rolled out in India, in Delhi and Haryana, and will slowly engulf the entire country, can access all telecommunications and internet communications. It means everything we say, text, over the phone, write, post or browse over the internet will be monitored by the Indian authorities. The scope and width of this surveillance, which can be accessed by 7 agencies including the IB, RAW, Central Board of Direct Taxes, Enforcement Directorate among others, have grave consequences for the constitutional right to privacy. Just the fact that such all-encompassing powers and capability have been acquired without apparently the necessary safeguards is a matter of serious concern. Today we will discuss the consequences of such surveillance and what needs to be done to ensure that ordinary people are ensured the right to privacy. To discuss this, I have with me Arun, Bhagat, former director of the IB and CBI, Pavan, Duggal, a cyber law practitioner, Ravi, Visvesvaraya, Prasad, an independent telecom consultant, Rajesh, Chharia, President Internet Service Providers Association, and Shalini, Singh, Deputy Editor of The Hindu. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Bhagat, I would like to come to you first. When you were the director of IB, I'm sure you would have wanted something like this in your control, but I'm sure these things were not available during your time. It has now come to existence. Do you think this kind of an all-encompassing surveillance mechanism can be used in a manner that it doesn't affect the ordinary citizens?
Well, there will be regulations, there will be controls, and only after proper sanctions are taken will you carry on surveillance on a particular person. I mean, it is not going to be a random search or a fishing net which is thrown and which will catch all types of things. I think we must look at it in a proper perspective. After all, it is the need of the hour. There cannot be any dispute or debate about that. Everybody has to agree that in the modern times, means of communications which are being used to undermine the state, the security of the state, the security of the people. So you have to take steps, you have to take measures, and particularly with the technology being available and affordable, we also have to take steps which other countries have taken. So I don't think it should be seen as a spectre which is going to cast absolute shadows over the people's lives or harm it or affect it in any way. That would not be the right attitude. Yes, but proper controls are necessary and they should be put in place before any such thing is done.
Mr. Bhagat, I appreciate your, whatever you said, having been in the positions that you held, you obviously will be, you're saying what you're saying, but the problem is that you spoke of regulations and controls before you put something like this in place. The problem is that as far as we know, no such regulations or controls have been yet established. I'll come back to you later. Mr. Chharia, do you think any of those regulations have been put in place?
From last 2 years, we are hearing about the central monitoring system. But yeah, before this central monitoring system, they are doing the regional type of monitoring of all the service providers and especially the major service providers.
Right.
Where the
when you say major service providers, please explain what it is.
I will not be able to name any service provider, yes, but I will say the upstream providers who have got the gateway and who have got the very footprint all over the country and who have also got the peering between each other. Those service providers are being monitored from a very long time. But what they are monitoring, they are not monitoring the 100% of the data, what 6.3 billion of data has been taken away. They are monitoring the targets data. target users.
That's what Mr. Bhagat says, that
Yeah.
it is
and,
targeted.
We are very frequently, we are also receiving some queries that we want to know about these customers who are using this type of internet so far, and especially to some target countries also, if we are doing very frequent calls to some target countries. So those are things which are in place, but now after the introduction of the central monitoring system,
Right.
what we feel that the intelligence will be much more stronger into the target also, because if you just compare the technology available in country, 40-bit encryption, while into the other countries we have gone to the 256 and the 512. So we have to compare our technology also with the intelligence.
Okay, Ravi, you think, he said that the service providers, this was only confined to some targeted things. Now with the present CMS, from what I read, it is just that they will have random access to everything which is being said or written.
Yes, certainly, because what the central monitoring system does is that it will be taking a parallel line from the mediation servers of all the
One second,
telecom
before that I
operators.
want on clarification.
Yes.
Earlier, when we said targeted, it meant that that whoever had that kind of a power within the government who had to request the service providers of, to particular numbers were given. But now they don't need to do that. That whole system is now, the CMS doesn't have to go to any of this, telephone operators or anybody. They just can random, all the users can be monitored.
Okay, well, let me explain the legal provision.
No, I want the technical.
Yeah, the technical. Well,
yes.
See, technically, PRISM can monitor each and every one. Okay?
CMS.
The CMS can monitor each and everybody. Until now, you had that capability, but really what was happening was that mobile operators would, you could tap about a few thousand phones at a time.
Right.
Now you're having all these off-the-air, you're having the off-the-air surveillance systems which spoof the base station of a cellular operator, and therefore all the calls which are in the vicinity of that base station, which may be a few thousand, can be listened into.
Right.
Secondly, you have these deep packet sniffers of the internet service providers.
Right.
Again, you have the capability to examine each and every packet passing through, where you sniff the packets and you can try to open the contents of the packets and see the contents. So both these capabilities are there with the central monitoring system. Now, earlier the position was that phone tapping or email surveillance, electronic surveillance was governed by the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, Clause 5.2. The Indian Telegraph Rules of 1999, 419A, Rule 419A of the Telegraph Rules, and Section 69 of the Information Technology Act. But all of these envisage, as Mr. Arun Bhagat pointed out, a particular person being surveilled for a specific reason, because the Home Secretary has to say
Absolutely.
that the reason why this phone has to be tapped, and he also has to certify that this information cannot be obtained by any other means, reasonably
Right.
obtained by any other means.
Right.
The purpose for which the person is being tapped, he's got to be identified by name,
and
number,
for a specific period of time.
and for a specific period which cannot, well, basically it's 3 months, 2 3-month periods.
Yes.
There has to be a review committee. Now, all this is fine on paper, but governments have been snooping all the time, and the Indian government, the US government, all of them violate their own laws. For instance, the Home Secretary is supposed to sign off on every phone tapping request. But there have been instances, I know, of the Home Secretary's own phone being tapped. Prime Minister's phones are being tapped. In Britain, MI5, MI6 were tapping Harold Wilson's phone when he was the Prime Minister. Recently, about 3 years ago, you had the entire Greek cabinet's phones being tapped.
What is the difference between what we had so far and what will happen after the CMS?
Well, after CMS,
the major difference is the major difference that now they don't need to take permission of anybody. They just can, it is just all encompassing.
Bypassing the service provider, because earlier what was happening is that the Home Secretary's office would send us a courier to the service provider who had to reply within 2 hours saying yes, comply with the request within 2 hours. Now it's done online.
Right.
So there's a digital signature which will go from the Home Secretary's office into the server of the ISP or the telecom operator. The telecom operator will not even know about it.
Will not even know. That is exactly
That's
that's the
totally
point.
automated. It's totally
Absolutely.
automated, and
we have Pavan Duggal, cyber law practitioner with us. Pavan, can you hear me?
Hi.
Okay. Pavan,
Yes, I can hear you.
Pavan, you have read about what is happening, the central monitoring, the CMS and all that. Now tell me, do we have the proper regulations? Is there any legal proper regulations and sanctions? All this, is there a law now which can monitor or ensure that this is not abused?
Well, couple of things. First and foremost, there's no official word about the central monitoring system.
Right.
Number two, we do not have a law of privacy in our place.
Right.
Consequently, there's no right to digital privacy. Number three, the fundamental right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution has been interpreted to include the right to privacy. But having said that, what it's currently appearing is that this is like an omnipotent umbrella of surveillance.
Right.
Agreed that the amendments to the IT Act gave unprecedented powers of surveillance, interception, monitoring and decryption to the government.
Right.
But the fact remains, you need to have in place appropriate checks and balances.
Right.
Now for this umbrella kind of a surveillance, it does not appear that currently any checks and balances are in place. And mind you, under section 69 of the IT Act, this so-called interception can only be done under certain limited circumstances, which is in the interest of sovereignty, integrity, security of India, friendly relations with other nations, public order, decency, morality, or to prevent the commission of any cognizable offense.
Right.
These are broad parameters.
Yes.
But does that mean they allow you to actually go ahead and surveil each and every individual located within the territorial boundaries of India, irrespective of the fact that whether he's a law-abiding citizen or not, whether he's ever contravened the law or not, or whether he's a criminal or not? So I think there are a lot of grey areas which need to be appropriately well addressed, because otherwise the potentiality of abuse of this system so as to trammel upon the civil liberties and the right to privacy of individuals, of netizens and of the people per se of India tremendously exist on paper and in reality.
Okay. Shalini, coming to you. No privacy legislation exists in this country. No proper safeguards are there to ensure that this kind of a system has been put in place. Now we don't, the government has, except in 2009, we were told in the parliament that, this something like this is coming in. But now, when you did the story, did you try to speak to anybody? Has anybody told you that, yes, this is in existence now, this is how it's going to work?
See, the privacy law has been, being discussed or being initiated for the last 3 years.
Yes.
And now the privacy legislation is under wraps. It should be on the net.
Yes.
It should be up for debate. We don't know what the legislation is going to look like. So, these are the things, while we understand, I've tried to make my story very, matter of fact.
Right.
Because I've said that this is a system and this is a gap in terms of privacy.
Right.
So, somewhere there needs to be a match. The law and the privacy law needs to match with, keep up with, in other words, with technology.
No, but
if technology is, zooming ahead and the laws don't keep up, we are in a difficult spot.
No, the CMS itself, is there officially, they accept the fact that they're doing all these things?
See, I have this diagram which says it all.
Yes.
Now, this diagram, who is going to agree that, who is going to take ownership of it? Technically,
that is exactly the point I'm asking you. Is anybody taking ownership of this?
Well, I have my sources, so I know that it comes from an official.
Having sources is different, but somebody should openly come out and take ownership for this. Ravi, is there
well,
anybody
I have a lot of messages on my phone, a lot of calls coming in this morning from mobile operators and a lot of the telcos, which
expressing concern.
Concern that why aren't other people also talking about that? This is absolutely lethal stuff. So my question is the reverse, that okay, fine, journalists are raising the issue. Why isn't the telecommunications industry raising the issue first? Because they know, they are the nuts and bolts of this entire piece.
Absolutely.
Why aren't they raising the issue?
I think on that note, we will go into a very short break, but these two few issues which has been raised now, we need to, why is it that the telecommunication industry is not, and what are the kind of safeguards which are necessary? We will discuss that. Please keep watching. We'll come back very soon. Welcome back. We are discussing the surveillance method which is being employed in India called the CMS and asking the question, are there adequate safeguards? Mr. Bhagat, coming back to you, from what we have learned after I spoke to you in the first round, from other members, apparently there are not adequate safeguards. In fact, even the government, except for saying that in 2009 that we are going to set up this CMS, nobody seems to be taking ownership of this entire mechanism. So where is the question of building safeguards? And as Pavan Duggal was pointing out, the existing laws doesn't have enough safeguards. Don't you think this is a matter of serious concern?
Well, you see, the safeguards that we have been working on are the broad guidelines which were given by the Supreme Court. And after that, the Supreme Court hasn't pointed out that there are any shortcomings in it. So we have to accept that these safeguards are adequate. Now, as regards the privacy law, that's another matter altogether. Now, if when the law comes in, I'm sure these safeguards will be in conformity with that, because you cannot have two contradictory, you cannot have regulations which contradict or contravene a law. So I think that will be taken care of. So let's not jump the gun.
Let's not jump the gun. Let's say yes, Shalini.
I just want to point out that the law is based on the Supreme Court guidelines of 1997, where there were 1 million mobile users and no internet users. So what I said previously, that the laws have to keep up with technology, and is that happening? And if it's not happening, then it's an issue of very, very serious debate.
Exactly, Mr. Bhagat. 1997 Supreme Court sent something. Supreme Court had no idea of how the technology is going to grow during this period. And now in 2013, if we are relying on what Supreme Court said in 1997, isn't that unfair?
No, how is it unfair?
We have 900 million users, mobile users today.
How does that make any difference? After all, what the Supreme Court authorized was interception of conversation or communication. So whether you communicated by writing, you communicated through digitalization, you communicated by voice, or whatever. I mean, it's the same thing.
Mr. Duggal,
and whether it is 1 million or 20 million, it really doesn't make a difference. And the CMS is coming in because of that. After all, whenever a requisition was made like this, it was the server or the service provider had come to know. And we know, it is on record, that there have been breaches of secrecy as far as that is concerned. People who are in the service provider's employ, who know about these things, have warned those people whose communications are under surveillance. So that doesn't serve any purpose. So this is just CMS, when it comes, is just a more organized and a better and a sophisticated way of doing something which you have been doing all along.
Mr. Duggal, do you agree with that? That this whole thing is based on the Supreme Court judgment, and Mr. Bhagat's argument is that whether it's 1 million or 900 million now, it doesn't make a difference. That is they are following the Supreme Court guidelines.
I personally believe that I'm in disagreement with that argument, because for the very simple reason, the PUCL matter was a simpliciter case of a telephone tapping of certain political leaders by the government.
Right.
It was a simpliciter case of that, and for that certain guidelines were given by the Supreme Court. That was in the analog era. Absolutely. Now we are in the digital era. That was telephone tapping. This is data communication. Any kind of data and information in the electronic form of any nature, whether audio, video, image or text, will all now be covered under the CMS.
Right.
Number two, the requirements of audio, video, image and text are dramatically different from a mere telephone conversation.
Right.
What Supreme Court was dealing was in 1997 was implicit or small isolated cases of telephone tapping. What they did not have in front of them was a scenario of a huge net being cast across the entire country under the garb of the CMS, and then trying to find out what are the legal policy or the regulatory challenges. Clearly the 2008 amendments have to the IT Act have opened up a Pandora's box.
Right.
And even if the 2009 rules pertaining to interception are to be kept into mind, they fall far, far short of what the existing realities today are. What was the technology in 2009 is dramatically different from 2013.
Right.
So if you are going to actually target the entire population, even if it's the huge population which has never ever violated the law. Clearly, there are impressions that the government wants to have information far more than what's really required in national interest. But all that is ultimately being garbed under the shadow of national interest or national security. So I think far more legal safeguards need to be required so as to dispel this basic proposition that in the event of a potential abuse or misuse of the process, it will tantamount to trammeling and violating the civil liberties and even the right to privacy. Clearly, the law cannot be used as a handle to become a big brother, to peep into the legitimate activities of legitimate law-abiding citizens at a time when the government does not even have any basis for questioning or potentially being suspicious of their intentions to commit any illegal or criminal activity.
Just to add to that, Google and Facebook didn't even exist in 97.
Absolutely.
So what are we talking about? That's a strange argument.
Ravi, my thing is, this metadata collection, which is called, these are all known as metadata. And you were telling me in the last program that we did on the US thing, that now they just have to use keywords and things like that to get data out. You know, it's humanly impossible to go through all the data that they have gathered. But the potential of misuse, the potential of abuse, how much is there?
Oh, it's this tremendous potential of abuse because they have every single phone conversation is being tapped. So I mean,
and if I am writing to, or if I am chatting with some friend on Facebook or somebody, and if I mention the word terror, I can become a part. I can become a.
Oh, absolutely, right? Or they have a lot of personal information about your relationships. People can be blackmailed.
Yes. You know, if I am telling a friend of mine jokingly, "Don't terrorize me," then I become a potential victim.
Because that will get swept in by the database
bomb.
mind.
Yes. If you use the word bomb, instantly you're open.
If I just tell somebody you're a bomb, then I am bombed.
No, but I wanted to respond to something that Mr. Arun Bhagat was saying.
Yes.
Is that, and whatever I'm saying is you can have all these laws and safeguards on paper, which even in the 419A, in this present PRISM CMS case is wholly inadequate because it envisages in the era of, this was the era of circuit switched phones where individual phones were being tapped at the exchange level. But you can have all these, but still intelligence agencies keep tapping. For instance, Indira Gandhi as Prime Minister suspected YB Chavan as Home Minister of tapping her phones. Okay, the Home Secretary's phone, Somaya's phone was
different. Those were a different era.
Those were a different era, but still there was no there were no safeguards.
There were no safeguards.
There were no safeguards, but even now, in spite of safeguards, phone tapping is going to keep happening.
We have had some very senior politicians' phone being tapped.
You had the president's phone being tapped.
Very recently.
No, you had the Home Secretary's phone being tapped.
Arun
Jaitley, Digvijay is saying, we have had very...
And even then, even within the intelligence agencies, there are many instances of juniors have tapped the phones of the raw chief, have been tapped by his own deputies. Everyone's collecting intelligence on everyone else in the intelligence agencies.
You can never ask, you can never get information about whether your phone was tapped or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what does that mean for my individual rights?
Mr. Bhagat, from whatever is being said, don't you think that, my question to you now is that there has been a lot of debate about parliamentary scrutiny of the intelligence agencies. You think time has come for that, some kind of a law to be brought about so that there is some parliament accountability to the intelligence agencies, of the intelligence agencies?
Well, certainly, if you think that will help, I'm sure you should put it in place. But as far as these aberrations are concerned, I mean, they are not the rule. There may be an individual.
They may, Mr. Bhagat.
And where you tell me which organization, which system, there are no aberrations.
No, Mr. Bhagat.
Any system that you want to pick up.
Sorry, Mr. Bhagat.
You see it all the time.
Sorry.
Why must you, throw the baby with the bathwater?
Sorry, Mr. Bhagat.
The phobia is being created.
No, sorry, Mr. Bhagat. So far, whatever systems were there, aberrations were a possibility. Now, with this kind of a sweeping system, aberrations can become the rule.
There's too much power in this.
No. After all, you have to trust somebody. I mean, you just can't
say
exactly that all the officers are feckless. They have no respect for the Constitution. They have no respect for the law. I think that is going too far. I mean,
Mr. Duggal,
these
yeah,
apprehensions
I take your
fears,
I take your point.
Being generated and a phobia is being created for nothing.
No,
okay, so please tell me,
just an improvement
did
of a
YB
system
Chauhan
which
write
is being
down
done.
on a file taking authorization to tap Indira Gandhi's phone?
Anyway,
that was
these are
required
not
by
facts.
Section 52 of the
This
Indian
is
Telegraph
fiction.
Act. The Indian Telegraph Act
Everyone
says,
says these things, but
Okay,
there is
Mr.
absolutely no proof in regard to this.
Mr. Bhagat,
these are allegations. Now, if you go on allegations, then how will you proceed? How will you work?
Mr. Bhagat, your point is well taken. Nobody wants to create a phobia, but this whole system itself seems to be built on a phobia. What do you think? Last words to you, Pavan? What kind of safeguards are necessary? Do you think a parliamentary oversight is necessary for, and the time has come for that? Very quickly, Pavan. Pavan?
I think he can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. The last words to you. Do you think parliamentary oversight is necessary now? The time has come for it. What kind of safeguards are necessary? Very quickly.
Couple of things. I think we need to amend the IT Act. Number two, I think we need to have far more safeguards, checks and balances in place than they are currently under the IT Act and under the IT Rules 2009. Number three, despite this overhauling system where there's no argument or there's no dispute to the basic proposition that in the event of a conflict between national security and privacy, national security wins, but nonetheless, the government must reassure the people that they are not out to trample upon the civil liberties and the right to privacy. And fourth and most significantly, transparency is the need of the hour. And all that through documented processes, procedures and practices. It's what is the people of India are expecting.
Okay.
They are not wanting a replication of the US model in India.
Okay. On that note, I think we're completely run out of time. We have to end. But the points made by Pavan at the end and all my guests during the program, transparency is very essential. But in this game of spooks, how much transparency they can provide is also a matter of debate. But the debate, a serious debate on this issue needs to start in this country before this CMS becomes an all-encompassing thing on our lives. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Arun Bhagat, Pavan Duggal, Mr. Rajesh Chharia, Ravi, Visvesvaraya, Prasad and Shalini Singh. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture, same time on Monday. Meanwhile, have a great weekend.